Upon beating the one reborn at the very base of the unseen village, the hunter discovers a corpse. Examination of the body brings the hunter into a dream, a seemingly ordinary lecture hall used by the School of Mensis. Hidden beyond the veil is something far more dubious, a nightmare that houses unspeakable horrors. Rise through the castle and you shall meet him, the arbiter of your undoing, Micolash. Just kidding, man, fuck that dude! Any sensible Bloodborne player knows full well that this caged up freak is a serious pain in the ass. By this point in the game, you've seen nearly everything there is to see, especially in terms of enemies and bosses. Sweaty boy? Check! What if Golden Girls was still on? Beat him. They've even got Big Chungus in the game.
I'm sorry, it wasn't even funny, I'm sorry.
The point is, you're nearly at the end of the game and you've assumedly seen all there is to see. Then Micolash shows up. He is, by and large, one of the most frustrating encounters in the game, manufactured to piss you off in a major way. Yet, despite this fact, a legion of horny fools paid good money to a very good cause. Also, I'd make this video. You guys did amazing work, so now it's time for me to completely and fully analyze Micolash, host of the Nightmare. Seeing as this is a full analysis, we will be discussing and speculating about Micolash's character and history, but we'll be saving that portion of the analysis for last. There's just a few more concrete elements of his character that we can cover first, like for instance... For the uninitiated, Bloodborne is an action RPG produced by From Software, the Japanese developer behind the Dark Souls series, or the more recent Sekiro: Shadows Die Twice. Despite the different worlds and mild genre shifts between these games, the boss fights are typically structured the same way. You are a small guy in a big room with a big guy. Boss size, shape, and complexity aren't exactly constant between all the games and boss fights, but typically it's just you, someone 5 times bigger than you, and a large empty arena. There's also the overwhelming sense of dread that comes from facing a foe who looks like they could kick your ass 6 ways from Sunday. I think that's a crucial part of the way these bosses are designed. The thing about Micolash is, he manages to subvert pretty much all of these boss tropes simultaneously. The first and most bizarre element of his encounter is his reluctance to fight. He takes one good look at you, the player, and runs away, raving like a madman as he goes. The first leg of the fight is all about chasing him down, trying to corner him or lead him into another room, all while these strange puppet-like enemies keep spawning and respawning infinitely. After you've managed to chase him into another room, the real fight can begin. This caged up nerd fights exactly like an enemy hunter, a few of which you've probably already fought on your way to the Nightmare. Unlike those hunters, however, Micolash doesn't have any weapons. He fights using hunter's tools, because this Mensis scholar is using an arcane build. What is arcane, you might ask? Well, it's a lot like spells in Dark Souls, a sort of magic you can spec your character to wield, but doing so kind of makes them a glass cannon, a term that perfectly describes Micolash. Physically, he's a weakling, but unless you came prepared with plenty of arcane protection, you'll be seeing a whole lot of this. These things, on their own, don't exactly make for a frustrating boss fight. Sure, it's subversive, but when you've been making these games as long as FromSoft have, you've got to think outside the box. It's what happens halfway through the fight that really grinds my gears. After laying into Micolash for quite some time, learning his patterns, and getting your revenge for the cat and mouse game you two had outside the true arena, the dude just disappears. He dies, turning into a puff of smoke, and teleports somewhere else in the Nightmare. Part 2 of this fight has you travel deeper into the castle, flanking proper enemies as you go, also you can chase Micolash around again. Only difference is, you're now in Mad Micolash's wacky Hall of Mirrors, meaning you can chase him into a dead end, and the bastard can just hop into a mirror to teleport away. Did I mention that he's right there in your ear, rambling and howling the whole time? Not ideal! As with the previous chase, there is a way to corner the boss and take him out for good. It's a bit more convoluted this time and has become ingrained in my mind, so I may never forget, but there's definitely a way around his bullshit. You chase him off into a room that he barricades himself inside, further subverting the typical FromSoft boss structure with his cowardice. There is a secret entrance into the room that a keen eye can find, which brings us to the official second half of the boss fight. By all accounts, it's the exact same as last time. The only difference is, he can now use a Call Beyond, another hunter's tool that summons several magic missiles that all home in on the player. A Call Beyond does major damage and can be difficult to avoid, which tends to be how most players die in this boss fight. Speaking from personal experience. So if you do die, rest assured that you will have to do the entire fight again, all the way back from the very first chase. Does it make sense yet why I hate this guy so much? All this to be said, there's absolutely a light at the end of this tunnel, a satisfying conclusion to this eldritch nightmare that Micolash has trapped us in. If you learn his moves and get the upper hand on Cage Boy in that second half of the fight, he dies for good, offering the player quite possibly the best line in any FromSoft game that I've ever heard.
Now I'm waking up! I'll forget everything!
Call me a sadist, but there is nothing more satisfying than hearing the dipshit scream like that. Music to my ears. Our second point of analysis is the Bastard's character design. For the most part, Micolash is unremarkable, save for the obvious piece of iconography on his head. Seeing as the cage is the most interesting facet of his design, we'll discuss that last. The host of the nightmare has adorned a set of particularly sexy? Is that what we're doing, Sam? We're just gonna change some of the words in Kyle's script? Okay. The host of the nightmare has adorned a set of particularly sexy scholar's robes that can be easily identified as belonging to the School of Bergenworth, an institute of research and experimentation focused on eldritch knowledge. From his ramblings, it can be assumed that Micolash is a learned individual, but his robes really cement that fact, tying him to a very notable place of learning in the world of Bloodborne. The grime that coats the uniform is due in part to the overall aesthetic of the game, though there is something to be said of the body you find in Yahar Ghul. From his prominence within the room, as well as the cage and concept art of Micolash sitting in a similar position, it can be assumed that the mummified remains in this chair are those of the Mensis scholar. His physical being is decayed, rotten, and coated in cobwebs. Therefore, it's only natural that his ethereal form in the dream would share a similar fate. An eagle-eyed viewer might also notice the shackles affixed to his wrists and ankles in both the concept art and on the body in the Unseen Village. These don't show up on his official model in the nightmare, but it can be intuited that whatever process allowed Micolash to exist within the nightmare wasn't exactly painless. Now we'll talk about the cage, because the cage is pretty important. As explained in its item description, this hexagonal iron cage is a device that restrains the will of the self, allowing one to see the profane world for what it is. It also serves as an antenna that facilitates contact with the Great Ones of the Dream. The cage is a tool that, supposedly, allows the Scholars of Mensis some amount of insight into the true nature of the world. Within the world of Bloodborne, insight is considered to be a very freeing thing. There is this common idea that knowledge breeds clarity, and from there an individual may think and act freely without the unseen puppeteering of higher powers. Yet, despite this shared ideology, the Scholars of Mensis have literally imprisoned themselves, caging their minds and trapping themselves within a nightmare. Whether they intended to live in the dream or not, scholars like Micolash have no method of escape anymore. To wake from the dream means death, so they are literally prisoners now. Head cages like these were used as means of torturing prisoners in medieval times, allowing their jailers to gouge their eyes or brand them with heated metal. This torturous imprisonment is surprisingly on brand with the Nightmare of Mensis, only the scholars willfully imprison themselves in the hopes of gaining some form of ascension. More than anything, it's a fascinating practice by a group of deeply deranged individuals, all led by Micolash. That, I suppose, brings us to the final point of analysis. Due to the nature of From Software games, this particular portion of the analysis will feature a lot of speculation. The lore of the greater world in Bloodborne is expanded upon in various item descriptions, though these descriptions never really paint the full picture. Similarly, we can never really know what Micolash's character truly is. We can only speculate based on some snippets of key information. First and foremost, considering his place in the Nightmare of Mensis, it can be assumed that Micolash was associated with this group of scholars. In fact, it's quite likely that, given his title as Host of the Nightmare, Micolash was a high-ranking member of the School of Mensis, possibly even its founder. It was through him that the Scholars of Mensis gained access to the various Nightmare Dreamlands, such as the Nightmare Frontier and the Nightmare of Mensis. To enter either of these dreams, one must first pass through the Lecture Hall, a space that seems inherently tied to Micolash and the School of Mensis. Before his time in Mensis, however, it can be assumed that Micolash was a member of the Byrgenwerth Scholars, who were all led by Provost Willem. We can assume this fact based on his robes, which belonged to the College of Byrgenwerth, and by the ramblings during his boss battle. Several pieces of information that he discusses, such as the existence of cause, the vacuous ROM, and the philosophy of eyes on the inside, are inherently tied to Byrgenwerth and its teachings. It is likely that when Lawrence separated from Willem to form the Healing Church, Micolash decided to leave as well to form his own place of learning. But what were the Scholars of Mensis hoping to achieve by reaching the Nightmare? Well, much like Willem before him, Micolash seems hell-bent on gaining more insight and knowledge about the Great Old Ones, attempting to commune with them to see what secrets they possess. The most notable example of this is his communing with Murgo, who lays at the very top of the Mensis Nightmare. Here, the infant Murgo is protected by its wet nurse, and based on how it reacts to the hunter's arrival in its chamber, the wet nurse likely kept the Scholars of Mensis at arm's length too. That, of course, is purely speculation. Whatever ritual brought Micolash into the dream was likely a very risky one, seeing as his and countless other bodies line the ritual chamber in the Unseen Village. He appears to have been at the very center of the ritual, and considering no other Mensis scholars are found in the Nightmare, he is likely the only member of the school that makes it into the Dreamland. This, coupled with his evident madness, seems to suggest that Micolash has been isolated in the Nightmare for quite some time. As a scholar, he is clearly in pursuit of knowledge, though how long he's been searching for the eldritch truths of the world is unknown. Had the hunter not killed him, he likely would have spent an eternity in exile, desperate for eyes on the inside. That, thankfully, concludes my examination of Micolash, Host of the Nightmare. All jokes aside, I am deeply fascinated by the world and characters of Bloodborne, even the more challenging characters to discuss. Honestly, if people enjoy this particular deep dive into the world of Bloodborne, I'd be happy to do similar videos about other characters or bosses. Any excuse to discuss Bloodborne on the channel is highly appreciated, so don't hesitate to let me know what you think. I'd also like to give a big thank you to all the wonderful donors who paid for this video to be made. You guys do seriously rock, and both Sam and I appreciate all the money you chipped in for the Bale project. On top of making this video, I am also obliged to write a love poem to Micolash, as it was one of our other donation incentives, so I'm gonna go ahead and do that here. Thanks a lot, guys. Oh grimy, stinky, caged up boy, seeing you fills my heart with joy. Your eldritch powers are so cool, I wish I could join your Mensis school. Though your face is messed up in a major way, I cannot help but yearn today. My time in this dream is nearly through. I'm waking up, but I'll remember you.